Okay, so good morning, everybody. What a beautiful day to have a Tanya class. This is a day where we reconnect to our source. We're going to be speaking a lot about, the source of the world in Shaar, Hayichud ve'emunah. This is a day to strengthen our source. I think that every single person who participates in this Tanya class is here for some reason or other, but we can all bring it down to we are all here because of the Rebbe and the effect that the Rebbe had on our lives. And at the end of the class, I will share a small story, but first we're going to learn Tanya. What a beautiful day to actually connect with the studies of Hasidus, which is a small taste of what's going to be when Mashiach comes. The study of Hasidus reveals godliness in this world, and when Mashiach will come, godliness will be completely revealed in this world, and we won't have any concealment. Meanwhile, Hashem is pretty concealed, and we are actually in middle of explaining, the Alter Rebbe is in the middle of explaining why that is so. Why is Hashem concealed? Why does it seem like Hashem is concealed? Why do we seem like we are independent creations in charge of our own destiny? So we are actually in the middle of discussing, and last chapter, chapter 5, the Alter Rebbe began the discussion, and this chapter continues the discussion of the way Hashem created the world through both Chesed and Gvura. Now, Chesed and Gvura, which translates to kindness and severity, are seemingly opposites. But as we began explaining in the last chapter, they are firstly united in their source, because at the level of spheres, at the level of attributes, when Hashem's light starts becoming something into this world, starts forming the world, Chesed and Gevura are not separate. They are united in their source at the level of the attributes, and they are both united at the same time with Hashem. Earlier, in the previous chapter or chapters, actually, the Alter Rebbe explained how the creative power of Hashem is constantly enclosed within creation. In other words, the infinite Hashem, which we cannot begin to possibly imagine, is actually fits inside the finite creation, which is actually, if you want to ponder on this for hours, you can, because it's just such an amazing concept that Hashem is in our world, is in our lives, is in us, even though we are finite, limited beings. But the way Hashem is enclosed within creation is that he is constantly creating creation out of nothingness. In other words, we can say that the created being is non-existent if it weren't for Hashem. The created being needs to be constantly recreated, and therefore is an aspect of its source. If we need to be constantly recreated, we are part of our source, which is Hashem. However, we experience it as existing because of tzimtzum, the process of tzimtzum, which comes from the attribute of Gevura, and as we began explaining last week, comes from the name of Hashem that is Elokim, which hides the creator from creation. So in other words, to recap, the name of Hashem, Elokim, correlates to tzimtzum, the process of Hashem's contracting his light, concealing his light from creation, not limiting his light, but concealing it, correlates to the attribute of Gvura, the ability to conceal and withhold, and also is found within nature. The name Elokim is actually the numerical equivalent, the gematria of the word Hateva, which is nature. So the name of Hashem, which is called Shem Havaya, Hashem, Havaya, that is the name of Hashem which creates. But nature, which is enclosed in Tzimtzum, is really how things appear to us. It conceals this light from above. Nature is actually a word used to describe the process of tzimtzum. Because when we look at nature, and I'm not referring to when you climb up on a beautiful mountain and you look at some gorgeous scenery and you get inspired and you say, Morabu Masach Hashem. You actually could get very inspired by nature. Hashem could be very revealed in nature. When we say nature, we are referring to the natural course of events, how things go on a day-to-day basis, cause and effect. The sun rises, the sun sets, things that you expect, you take for granted. That is nature concealing Hashem. In actual fact, nature is a shield and a protection for the name Havaya, the name of Hashem Havaya, because the fact that Hashem creates yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, has to be concealed, otherwise it would cease to exist. So to understand this just a little bit better using the mashal of the sun, so the shield of the sun protects the world from the sun. But not only does it protect the world from the sun, not only does it conceal to a certain extent the sun, it actually reveals the sun to us. So while it conceals, that's why it reveals. Because if there would not be a shield on the sun would consume the entire earth. The light would be too much for us to handle. The warmth would be too much for us to handle. We would cease to exist. So the shield of the sun conceals the rays of the sun, but also reveals the light of the sun. So tzimtzum, or the attribute of gevura, our apparent independence, appears to imply a lack of involvement from Hashem. You can even go so far as to say it can imply, for those who don't understand, a duality, God forbid, a contradiction to the creative power of Hashem. But the Alter Rebbe explains that in truth, Gvura is actually an expression of chesed. It's an expression of kindness. Severity is an expression of kindness because Gvura contributes to the creation of the world. Gvura does not block creation. It contributes and allows creation. Gvura and chesed, kindness and severity, do not contradict each other. They seem to, right? One side is kindness, the other side of severity. They don't contradict each other, but they are both subservient and annulled to their source, serving a common purpose, which is the creation of the world. So when we say that Olam Chesed Yiboneh, that Hashem built the world with kindness, it's true, but together with Gevura. So it's the Gevura, the severity, which is in the kindness. And much as the same way as the first 53 chapters of Tanya are based on a pasuk from the Torah, are based on the pasuk Ki karei velecha hadavar ma'od b'ficha ubelvavcha la'asosoi, that Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to the nation of Israel, and he told them how accessible, how relevant, how easy it is to practice the Torah and the mitzvahs both in thought, speech, and action. This part of Tanya is also based on another pasuk, which also is something that Moshe Rabbeinu told the nation of Israel, V'yadata hayom, and you should know today, V'ashivaisa elav avecha, and you should take upon your heart, hearken, Ki Hashem hu ha'elikim. Hashem is Elokim. They're not two separate things. Hashem is Elokim. They are in truth one thing because Hashem and his attributes are one. You see, we are made up of all different parts, but Hashem is one thing only. If we know that Tzimtzum is not something separate from Hashem, right, then we will know that Bashamayim mima'al ve'al ha'aretz mitachas ein oid. Then we will come to the realization that everything from the heavens above till the earths below, everything is Hashem. There is nothing but Hashem. We are not a secondary existence. The concealment is only towards creation, but not to Hashem. To Hashem, everything is one. We are part of Him, our source. Now, when we say that the concealment is only towards creation, but not to the Creator, let's look at an example of a teacher and a student. So let's say a teacher has to explain a difficult concept to a student, and he's looking for different ways to explain it. So he uses a mashal, a parable, right? By doing so, he conceals what is complex to the explanation. He conceals the complicated parts, right? And he presents it to his student on a simpler level, relative to the student's understanding, according to the student's level. But to the teacher, the mashal hides nothing and contains the entire concept. And that is the difference between creation and the creator. The creator is concealed from us, but we don't see with our own physical eyes a revelation of Ein Od Milvado. We have to learn about it. We have to reflect upon it. We see him. I mean, learning these chapters of Tanya bring us to the realization that everything is Hashem. But Hashem, it's like a mashal. Hashem sees it all. For Hashem, there's nothing lacking. We are one and part of Hashem. And therefore, to Hashem, the earth cannot be given a secondary status. And we're going to explain in a minute, what does that mean, a secondary status? It's like nothing. The earth is nothing from the perspective of Hashem. Now, what does the word secondary what does this word secondary mean in this case? So, one can think of many ways to explain the concept of Hashem and its shield and how Hashem created the world. One of the concepts that a person might compare the creation of the world to is the connection between body and soul. And actually, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain how this is an erroneous comparison, that Hashem and his world, Hashem and Elohim, is not like the body and soul. Now, why would a person think that the body and soul is comparable to Hashem and his creation? Because the soul gives life to the body. Without the soul, the body has no life. And when the soul leaves the body, the physical body exists, but it's not living, right? So one could make that mistake and think, oh, okay, the soul gives life to the body. Hashem gives life to its creations. But, the Alter Rebbe says, the body is secondary because the soul does not create the body. It just gives it life. And when we say just gives it life, I'm not trying to diminish the fact that the soul gives life to the body. That's an amazing thing, right? But in actual fact, even though the soul gives life to the body, it actually does not sustain the body physically. The body originates from the parents, firstly, of the child. And secondly, the body gets nourished from either the food which a mother eats when she's pregnant with her baby, and thereafter, the mother continues to nourish the body, and any food that the body eats afterwards. So in other words, the body gets life from the soul, the ability to live, but does not get nourishment from the soul. So the connection is very different. The nourishment that the body gets is external to the soul, external to the body itself as well. And that's why we cannot say that the body and soul are one, but that the body is secondary to the soul. In other words, the body and soul are separate at their source. They do not have the same source. And we can say that the body is insignificant compared to the soul, but we cannot say that the body does not exist in comparison with the soul. Which is not so with creation of the world and all created beings. Because Hashem and Elohim come from the same source and are united in their source. And actually, from the perspective of Hashem, we do not exist. But we cannot say that from the perspective of a soul, the body doesn't exist. The body is insignificant, perhaps, but it exists and even has a different source and different ways of being nourished. Whereas the world, the creation, is not secondary to Hashem's creative powers. It is one with Hashem's creative powers. Gvura is not a concealment because it's not something separate from Hashem. Hashem is Elohim. Hashem Hua Elohim. And we actually say these words at the end of Yom Kippur, a very, very, very holy moment, right? We repeat various times, Hashem Hua Elohim, Hashem Hua Elohim, to remind us that we are one with Hashem. Our entire reality is Hashem. Our entire reality is one with Hashem. From our perspective, that's concealed, but from Hashem's perspective, we are one with Hashem. We are united with Hashem. And that is this chapter, which is going to bring us into the next chapter, where the Alter Rebbe brings one of the central themes of Shaar Hayichud Ve'emunah, which is about the unity of Hashem, that there are two types of unities of Hashem. You know, when you look at the word unity, you think unity is one, right? Hashem is one does not mean that there are other ones, but that there is nothing else besides Hashem. And next chapter, the Alter Rebbe will begin discussing what this means on a higher level and what this means on a lower level, which could be confusing because when we think of unity, we think of one. We don't think of one level, two levels, but we will see that it's from the perspective of Hashem and the perspective of creation. And that is chapter number 6. Before we continue and stop the recording, does anyone have any questions or observations about this chapter? Because I think it would be a very nice idea to spend a few minutes after we learn for anyone to share a story of the Rebbe that they had, and I will share a story myself. Does anyone have any questions meanwhile before we stop the recording? Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording.